The gun was pointed at my head. I could hear the hammer click back, a small mechanical sound that somehow swallowed every other noise in the room. The fountain outside, the servants' footsteps, the faint echo of the evening call to prayer drifting through the palace walls. All of it gone, replaced by that single sound and the ragged sound of my own breathing. My husband, if you could call a 68-year-old man who purchased me like livestock a husband, was standing 3 feet away. His hand was not shaking, his eyes were not wet. There was nothing in them. Nothing. That was the most terrifying part. Not rage, not grief, just nothing. As if pulling that trigger would cost him no more emotion than closing a car door. He raised the gun. He pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. He pulled it again. Click. Again. Click. Again. Click. Again. Click. Again. Click. 6 times. 6 times that gun refused to fire. And in the silence after the 6th click, I heard something else entirely. A voice, low and warm and completely impossible, that said 3 words directly into the center of my chest. I am here. But to understand how I got to that room, standing barefoot on cold marble tile with an empty gun pointed at my face, I need to take you back. Back to before the gun, before the marriage contract, before the moment my father sold my future for a briefcase of money and a political alliance. Back to the beginning, when the cage was still made of gold and I hadn't yet learned to see the bars. My name, my real name, I cannot tell you. Not because I'm ashamed of it, but because the people who want me dead are still alive, still powerful, and still looking. What I can tell you is that I was born into one of the most prominent families in the Gulf region. A family whose name opened palace doors across 3 countries. A family with more wealth than most American cities will ever see in a generation. I grew up inside walls that most people only see in photographs and call breathtaking. And they were breathtaking. I want to be honest about that. Our family compound sat on the edge of the desert, and at dawn, when the first light turned the sand to copper and gold, there was nothing on earth more beautiful. The main palace had 47 rooms. I counted them once as a child, running through marble corridors that echoed my footsteps back at me like a game. The ceilings were layered in actual gold leaf, not paint, not imitation, and our chandeliers were imported from a craftsman in Austria who made them exclusively for royal households. They caught the light in the mornings and scattered it across the walls like scattered diamonds. The smell of our home was oud, a rich, smoky incense made from rare agarwood that costs more per gram than gold. It burned from burners set in every corner of every room, all day and all night, so that the scent became inseparable from my sense of home itself. Even today, years later, in a different country, in a different life, if I smell oud on someone passing me on the street, something in my chest tightens. We had 14 house servants who rotated in shifts. There was a separate kitchen staff, a driver for every adult in the family, and security personnel stationed at every gate. My mother wore a Cartier bracelet that she never removed, 18-carat white gold with a row of emeralds the size of my thumbnail. My father drove a white Rolls-Royce Ghost and wore the finest white thobe, the long traditional robe worn by men of status in the Gulf, pressed and starched every single morning by a servant whose only job was the care of my father's clothing. I had private tutors instead of school. I had a bedroom larger than most American apartments. I had a walk-in closet filled with dresses I was barely allowed to wear outside the compound walls. I had everything, and I was suffocating. Not all at once. When you are a child inside a golden cage, you don't feel the bars right away. You feel the warmth of the gold. You feel the safety of the walls. You run your fingers along the smooth, expensive surfaces, and you think, this is what love looks like. This is what being chosen feels like. It took me years to realize that what I had mistaken for love was simply ownership, dressed in silk and perfume, but ownership nonetheless. I was 12 years old the first time I heard my father mention the Sheikh's name in connection with mine. I didn't understand then what that conversation meant. I didn't understand until I was 14, sitting in a room full of men I had never met, wearing a gold embroidered dress my mother had spent 3 days preparing, while my future was negotiated like a real estate transaction. I had everything money could buy, but I didn't have the one thing my soul was screaming for. And somewhere beneath all that marble and gold and oud smoke, something in me was already beginning to crack. The morning of my 15th birthday, I woke up before the Fajr, the first of 5 daily Islamic prayers, called out before the sun rises, when the sky is still that deep, bruised blue between night and dawn. I could hear the muezzin's voice, the man whose sacred duty it is to call Muslims to prayer, drifting across the compound from the small mosque my father had built on the property. It was a beautiful sound. I want you to understand that. Whatever I tell you next, whatever I came to believe, I want you to know that sound was genuinely beautiful to me. It was the sound of my entire childhood, the sound of my mother rising in the dark, wrapping herself in white, pressing her forehead to the prayer rug, the sound of order, of certainty. But that morning, for the first time in my life, the sound made me feel something I had no name for: empty. I lay there on sheets that cost more than most people's monthly rent, staring at a ceiling painted with geometric patterns of deep blue and ivory, and I felt a hollow so wide and so deep inside my chest that I pressed my fist against my sternum just to feel something solid. I was 15 years old. I was already married, legally, contractually, though the Sheikh had agreed to wait until I was prepared before I came to live with him. I was already someone's property. And the most terrifying thing about that morning was not the fear or the grief, it was the numbness. I had been raised in a household where Islam was not simply a religion, it was the architecture of everything: the walls, the schedule, the language, the law. We prayed 5 times daily. We fasted through the entire month of Ramadan, the Islamic holy month of fasting from dawn to sunset, observed by over 1 billion Muslims worldwide. We gave to charity. My father could recite entire chapters of the Quran from memory, his voice filling the courtyard with words that the men in our family had been reciting for generations. Faith was not a personal choice in our home. It was inherited, assumed, and enforced, and I had never questioned a single word of it. Until that birthday morning, I rose and performed wudu, the ritual washing of hands, face, and feet that Muslims complete before prayer, standing at the marble basin in my bathroom, watching the water run over my fingers. And I whispered the prayer. I said every word correctly. I positioned myself on the prayer rug, facing Mecca, the holiest city in Islam, located in Saudi Arabia, the direction all Muslims face during prayer. I pressed my forehead to the ground in the position called sujood, the position of complete submission, and I felt nothing. That had never happened before. There had always been something, even if it was just the comfort of habit, the warmth of ritual, the sense of belonging to something ancient and large. But that morning, the words left my mouth and seemed to dissolve immediately, like smoke, like they hit a ceiling 3 feet above my head and went no further. I stayed with my forehead on the rug long after the prayer was finished. The marble was cold against my skin, and in that silence, in that strange, suspended moment, I whispered something I had never whispered before, something that felt dangerously close to a question rather than a submission. Is anyone actually there? Nothing answered. The fountain outside continued its soft, indifferent sound. A car engine turned over somewhere near the gates. One of the drivers beginning his morning shift. Life in the palace continued exactly as it always had. And I rose from the rug, smoothed my dress, and told myself I was simply tired. Grief, I had been taught, looks like weakness. Doubt, I had been taught, looks like sin. So I buried both. It was 3 weeks later that I found the letter. Our compound employed a rotation of household workers, some local, some from South Asia, some from the Philippines. There was a woman, I will call her Miriam, who had worked in our kitchen for 6 years. She was quiet in the specific way that people learn to be quiet when they understand exactly how little power they hold. She moved through the palace the way water moves, finding the path of least resistance, taking up no more space than necessary, speaking only when addressed. I had never thought much about Miriam, and I am ashamed to say that. She was furniture to me, the way all the servants were furniture to all of us, present, functional, invisible. That is the particular cruelty of immense wealth that no one talks about honestly. It doesn't just separate you from poverty, it separates you from people. One afternoon, I slipped away from my tutor's session, something I had begun doing with increasing desperation, simply to walk the back corridors of the compound alone, and I passed the small storage room of the east kitchen. The door was barely open. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't suspicious. I was just walking. But I smelled something. Not oud, not rose water. Something different. Something lighter, cleaner, like rain on warm stone. It stopped me in the corridor, the way a hand on your shoulder stops you. I pushed the door open 2 more inches and saw Miriam sitting on an overturned crate in the corner, her head bowed, her lips moving silently. A small book lay open across her knees, not the Quran, which I would have recognized immediately, something different, smaller, a different texture of page. She looked up and saw me. For a fraction of a second, pure terror crossed her face. She closed the book so fast the pages whispered. She stood. She opened her mouth to say something, an apology, an explanation, a plea, and I held up my hand. I don't know why I said what I said next. I don't know where it came from. But I looked at this woman whose name I barely knew, who had worked inside my home for 6 years, while I looked straight through her, and I said very quietly, "What were you reading?" She stared at me. I could see her calculating risk, the way only people who have lived in genuine danger learn to calculate it. Fast, instinctive, total. And then something shifted in her expression. Some decision was made. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time, and she said, "A gospel, the Gospel of John." I didn't know what that meant. I want to be honest. I had been taught that the Bible was a corrupted book, a text that had once contained truth but had been altered and distorted by humans until it was unreliable. That was what I knew. That was all I knew. But something about the way she said it, the specific, quiet courage of it, made my pulse do something strange. "What does it say?" I whispered. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she opened the book again, and she read me one sentence. Just one. I will tell you which sentence it was, because it matters. Because that sentence followed me out of that storage room and down every corridor of the rest of my life. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." I didn't understand it, not intellectually, not theologically, but something in me, something below thought, below language, responded to those words like a key turning in a lock I hadn't known was there. I walked away without another word. I said nothing to my mother. I said nothing to my father. I said nothing to anyone. But I thought about that sentence every single day for the next 2 weeks. And the hollow place in my chest, instead of widening the way emptiness usually does, began, almost imperceptibly, to feel like it was waiting for something to fill it. I didn't know yet what that something was, but I knew, with a certainty that frightened me deeply, that I was going to find out. Even if finding out cost me everything. I want you to understand what it meant, physically, practically, in the world I lived in, to possess a Bible. It was not simply against the rules of my household. It was not the equivalent of a teenager hiding a diary or a forbidden novel under a mattress. In the country where I lived, importing, distributing, or owning a Bible could result in confiscation, interrogation, and in certain circumstances, criminal prosecution. Inside a family like mine, a family whose reputation was built on religious piety, whose standing in the community was inseparable from Islamic orthodoxy, discovery would have meant something far worse than legal consequences. It would have meant the kind of family justice that never reaches a courtroom, the kind that happens behind palace walls, in rooms with no windows, and is never spoken about again. I knew all of this. I went to find Miriam anyway. It took me 4 days to engineer a moment alone with her. Our household ran on a rigid schedule: meals, prayers, tutoring sessions, family gatherings, and I was watched more carefully than I had ever been now that my marriage had been formalized. My mother had developed a particular habit of appearing in doorways, checking, cataloging, assessing. She loved me, I believe that. But her love had long since been trained to express itself as surveillance. I found Miriam on a Thursday afternoon during the window between Asr and Maghrib, the third and fourth of the 5 daily Islamic prayers, the stretch of late afternoon when the household settled into its quietest rhythm. The kitchen staff had finished the afternoon prep. My mother was resting. My father was in his study with 2 associates, whose voices I could hear murmuring through the heavy carved door. I slipped into the east kitchen corridor and found her restocking a shelf with jars of saffron, the expensive, blood-red spice that perfumed our rice dishes at every major family meal. She heard my footsteps and turned, and when she saw it was me, her hands went very still on the shelf. I didn't waste time. There was no safe time to waste. "I need to read it," I said. The book you had. I need to read it myself. She looked at me for a long moment. The only sounds were the distant hum of the kitchen ventilation and the faint rhythmic drip of a faucet somewhere behind the wall. Then she said, very quietly, if they find it on you, you tell them you found it in the street. You tell them you don't know where it came from. You do not say my name. I nodded. Say it, she said, not unkindly, but firmly, the way someone says something when they understand the stakes are not abstract. I don't know where it came from, I said. I found it in the street. She held my gaze for one more second, then she reached beneath the lowest shelf, behind a large tin of cardamom, and she pressed a small thin paperback into my hands. It was a pocket New Testament, the second half of the Christian Bible, containing the four Gospels, the letters of the Apostles, and the book of Revelation. It was worn soft at the corners. Someone had read it many times before me. There were faint pencil marks inside, underlines, small notations in a language I didn't recognize. It was the most dangerous object I had ever held. It was also, somehow, the most alive. I hid it inside the lining of a winter coat, stored in the back of my closet. A cashmere coat I had worn perhaps twice, buried under a row of formal abayas, the long black cloaks worn by women in conservative Gulf households when appearing in public. No one would touch that coat for months. I told myself that. I told myself that repeatedly, like a prayer in reverse, not asking for something, but trying to convince reality to hold still. That night, after the last prayer, after the house had descended into its nighttime quiet, I retrieved it. I sat on the floor of my closet, not on my bed where I might fall asleep, not at my desk where light under the door might be noticed, but on the floor, in the dark, with a single small flashlight I had taken from the emergency drawer in the kitchen 2 days before and hidden in my underwear drawer. I opened to the first page of the Gospel of John, the same Gospel Miriam had been reading, the same first line she had read to me. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I read it again, and something happened on the third reading that I still cannot fully explain. The words stopped being words and became something more like pressure, like a presence, like the sentence was not describing something that happened a long time ago, but was describing something happening right now, in this closet, in this dark, with this ridiculous small flashlight and this terrified 15-year-old girl on a cold marble floor. I kept reading. I read about a man named John the Baptist, a prophet who came before Jesus, declaring his arrival, calling people to repentance in the wilderness. I read about a wedding where wine ran out and Jesus turned water into wine without ceremony or announcement, quietly, almost privately, as if the miracle were an aside. I read about a religious leader named Nicodemus who came to Jesus at night. At night, I noticed, secretly, the way I was reading right now. And Jesus told him that to see the kingdom of God, a person must be born again, born of water and of spirit. I had to stop at that phrase, born again. In my religious education, I had been taught that Islam meant submission, beautiful, total, complete submission to the will of Allah. And there was a logic to that, a structure I had lived inside my entire life. But this idea, being born again, not reformed, not disciplined, not submitted, but born again, was something my mind had no category for. It suggested that the person you currently were was not the final version, that there was a version of you that hadn't arrived yet, that transformation wasn't about following rules more perfectly, but about becoming something genuinely new. I pressed my back against the wall of my closet, surrounded by silk and cashmere and the faint residual smell of oud that clung to everything in that house, and I felt the hollow place in my chest do something it had not done in months. It ached, not in the bad way, in the way a muscle aches when it has finally been used, in the way your lungs ache when you step outside after a long time in a closed room and take in real air. I read for 3 hours. I read until the flashlight battery began to dim and the words on the page started to blur at the edges. I read about a Samaritan woman, a woman who was an outcast, an outsider, someone her own society had placed outside the boundaries of respect and dignity, who met Jesus at a well, and how he spoke to her not the way powerful men had always spoken to her, not with transaction or demand or contempt, but with the specific, unhurried attention of someone who saw her completely and was not afraid of what he saw. He told her things about her own life that he had no natural way of knowing, and she actually ran, to tell everyone she had ever known. I understood something about that woman that I could not have articulated then, but that I feel clearly now, years later. She ran because she had been truly seen, perhaps for the first time. And being truly seen, when you have spent your entire life being assessed and categorized and valued for what you represent rather than who you are, that is the most disorienting, overwhelming, magnificent thing that can happen to a human being. I closed the book just before 3 in the morning. I pressed it flat against my chest for a moment before hiding it again back behind the cashmere coat, behind the row of abayas in the dark. I was reading words that could get me killed, and I could not stop. But I didn't know that 3 floors above me, in my father's private security office, a small screen was glowing, and on that screen, in grainy green night vision footage, a camera that I had never known existed was pointing directly at my closet door. They didn't come for me immediately. That is the thing I have thought about most in the years since. The fact that they waited, that somewhere in that palace my father watched that footage or was told about that footage and made a deliberate decision to let me continue, to let me read, to let me go further, not out of mercy, not out of uncertainty, but because my father was, above all other things, a strategic man. And a strategic man does not confront a problem the moment he discovers it. He waits until the evidence is complete, until the case is airtight, until there is no room for the accused to maneuver. He waited 11 days. 11 days during which I read that New Testament 3 more times, cover to cover, hiding it in different places each night. Once inside a hollowed out decorative book on my shelf, once beneath the false bottom of a jewelry box, once folded inside a prayer rug I never used. 11 days during which I began to pray differently. Not the formal, structured prayers of my upbringing, not the Arabic recitations I had performed 5 times daily since I was 7 years old, but something messier and quieter and entirely in my own voice, spoken not toward Mecca but simply upward into the dark ceiling of my room in plain, broken sentences. If you're real, if you are actually real, please show me, please. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what any of this means, but something is happening to me, and I need to know if it's you. 11 days of that. 11 days of walking through the palace meals and family prayers and tutoring sessions with this enormous secret expanding inside my chest like a second heartbeat. The saffron rice at dinner, the dates and Arabic coffee laid out for guests, the sound of my mother's prayer beads clicking in the evening, the smell of oud rising from every corner of every room. All of it exactly the same on the surface, all of it, for me, completely changed. On the 11th night, I didn't hear them coming. My bedroom door opened at 11:47. I know the exact time because I was looking at the small clock on my bedside table, reading by lamplight with the New Testament open across my knees. And I had just been thinking that I should hide it soon, that it was getting late, that I was being careless, when the door swung open and the overhead light blazed on without warning. My father stood in the doorway. He was wearing his white thobe, but without the bisht, the formal outer cloak worn over the thobe for appearances and occasions. So I knew he had not just come from outside, had not dressed for this moment, had been awake and waiting. Behind him stood my oldest brother Tariq, 23 years old, broad-shouldered, wearing a look on his face I had never seen before and hoped to never see again. Not anger, not shock, something colder than both, calculation. And behind Tariq, standing in the hallway where she clearly had not expected to be seen, was my younger sister Hessa, 14 years old. She would not meet my eyes. Her hands were folded in front of her, very still, and her face was the color of someone who has done something they cannot undo. She had told them. My little sister, who had seen me retrieve the book from behind the coat 2 evenings ago when she came to borrow a scarf without knocking. My little sister had gone to my father. I want to be careful here about how I say this, because I have had years to sit with it, and I have chosen not to let it become hatred. She was 14. She had been raised, as I had been raised, to understand that certain things were absolute, that loyalty to family meant loyalty to faith, that reporting a deviation was not cruelty but love, that she was protecting me by exposing me. She believed that. I believe that she believed that. It does not make what happened next any less devastating. My father's eyes went to the book in my hands. He crossed the room in 4 steps. He took it from me without a word, simply reached down and removed it from my hands the way you remove something from a child who has picked up something dangerous without understanding what it is. He turned it over. He looked at the cover. He set it on the edge of my bed with a deliberateness that was somehow more frightening than if he had thrown it across the room. Then he looked at me. My father was 61 years old. He was not a large man physically, medium height, lean, silver at his temples, but he carried authority the way certain men do, as though it were a physical property of his body, a field of force that reorganized the air around him. When he spoke, his voice was completely controlled. That was the thing about my father. He never shouted. In my entire childhood, I never once heard him raise his voice. He didn't need to. Where did you get this? My mouth was dry. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was certain he could hear it. I found it, I said, outside the compound, near the south gate. I was curious. I should have thrown it away. The lie came out exactly the way I had rehearsed it, flat, simple, without elaboration. Miriam had been right to make me practice it. My father looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "How many times have you read it?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water, because it wasn't the question of someone who had just found a book in his daughter's hands. It was the question of someone who already knew the answer and was measuring how much truth I was willing to offer. I said nothing. "We have been watching you for 11 days, he said. "The camera in the East Corridor has existed for 3 years. You did not know about it. That was intentional." The room seemed to tilt slightly. 11 days. They had known for 11 days. "You have read this book," he continued, "multiple times. You have hidden it in at least 4 different locations. You have been seen praying alone, in your room, at hours that do not correspond to the 5 prayer times. Praying in a manner that does not resemble Islamic prayer." He paused. The clock on my bedside table ticked. Outside, the fountain continued its soft sound, indifferent to everything. "You will tell me right now whether you have spoken to anyone outside this family about what you have been reading, and you will tell me who gave you this book." "I found it," I said again. My voice did not shake. I am still, to this day, faintly amazed that my voice did not shake. My father picked the New Testament up from the bed. He held it for a moment, and then he did something that broke me more than any shouting could have. He looked at it with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not rage, not contempt, something closer to grief, a brief, unguarded flicker of pain, as if this small book in his hand represented not just my rebellion, but some private failure of his own. Some crack in something he had spent his entire life building. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then it was gone, sealed over, and he was my father again, controlled, absolute, unreachable. "You are a disgrace," he said, "not just to this family, to our bloodline, to every man in this lineage who has honored Allah for 3 generations. You are carrying the ideas of the enemy into this house." "Baba, do not speak." He handed the book to Tariq without looking at him. Tariq took it, and I watched my brother carry my New Testament out of my room, and I knew I would never see it again. "Your phone," my father said. I handed it over. "You will not leave this wing of the palace without escort. You will attend prayers with the family. You will speak to no one on the household staff without a family member present." He straightened his thobe at the cuff, that small habitual gesture of composure. "Your husband has been informed that the preparation period is being shortened. You will be transferred to his household within 30 days. 30 days. Baba, please. This conversation is finished." He walked out. Tariq followed without looking at me. Hessa lingered in the doorway for just a moment, one moment, and I saw her mouth open slightly, as if she were about to say something. Her eyes were wet. She had not expected this, I think. She had expected correction, restriction perhaps, not this. But she said nothing, and she closed the door behind her. I heard the lock turn. I stood in the center of my bedroom, with its gold leaf ceiling and its Austrian chandelier and its view of the desert at night. All that ancient, indifferent beauty, and I understood something with a clarity that was almost peaceful in its completeness. The palace that was my home had become my prison, and the sentence had already been decided. I just didn't know yet what form it would take. The first week of my confinement had a strange suspended quality, like the moment after a glass falls from a table but before it hits the floor. Everything was already broken. I just hadn't heard the sound yet. My world shrank to the east wing of the palace. 4 rooms, my bedroom, a sitting room, a bathroom, and a small private courtyard that opened onto a garden I had played in as a child. The courtyard had a fountain, smaller than the main one, shaped like an eight-pointed star, a classic Islamic geometric pattern, and a single pomegranate tree that my mother had planted the year I was born. I used to climb it as a little girl. Now I sat beside it on the stone bench and stared at it and tried to remember who that little girl was and what she had believed the world would give her. A female servant, a new one I didn't recognize, which I understood immediately was intentional, brought my meals 3 times a day on a tray: saffron rice, roasted lamb with herbs, dates and Arabic coffee in the mornings. The coffee served in the small handleless cup called a finjan, the kind that gets refilled automatically as a gesture of hospitality. The food was exactly as it had always been, prepared with the same care, presented with the same precision, as if the kitchen did not know or did not care that the person receiving it was no longer a beloved daughter, but a prisoner awaiting transfer. I was not beaten. I want to be clear about that, because I know it is the first question. In the early days of my confinement, there was no physical violence. My father was not that kind of man, or rather, he was not the kind of man who needed to be. His control was architectural. He built the walls rather than using his hands. The locked door, the removed phone, the new servant who watched me without pretending otherwise, the prayers I was escorted to and escorted back from. These were his instruments. They required no raised voice, no bruise, no visible evidence. They were simply the shape of my new life. But somewhere in the second week, something shifted. It was my uncle who came. My father's younger brother, I will call him Sheikh Mansoor, was a different kind of man entirely. Where my father was cold architecture, Sheikh Mansoor was weather, unpredictable, atmospheric. He swept into rooms the way pressure systems sweep in before storms, and everyone around him recalibrated instinctively, the way animals recalibrate before rain. He was 64 years old, heavy set, with a thick silver beard he kept precisely trimmed, and small, quick eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. He wore a bisht trimmed in gold thread over his thobe, the formal outer cloak that indicated status, and he smelled of a particular oud blend so heavy and ancient it seemed less like a fragrance and more like a declaration. He had driven from the city specifically to see me. That alone told me everything. He came into my sitting room without knocking. Doors, for men of his standing, existed for other people, and he sat in the largest chair as though it had been placed there for him. The new servant withdrew. He looked at me for a long moment without speaking, with those quick, assessing eyes moving across my face the way a jeweler examines a stone for flaws. "Your father tells me you have been reading Christian material," he said. Not a question, an opening statement. "I found a book." Stop. His voice was not loud, but it had a texture to it, a density, that made the word feel physical. "We are not going to do that. You are not a child, and I am not conducting an investigation. The investigation is complete." He reached into the chest pocket of his bisht and produced a folded document. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and set it on the low table between us. It was handwritten in Arabic, the formal, classical Arabic used for official and legal documents, not the conversational Arabic of daily speech. I could read it. I had been educated carefully. It took me perhaps 30 seconds to understand what I was looking at. It was a formal family decree, the kind of document that, in certain Gulf families of religious and political standing, carries the weight of law within the private sphere of family governance. It had my father's seal on it. It had Sheikh Mansour's counter-signature. It had the signature of the family's religious advisor, an Islamic scholar, a man I had known since childhood, who had taught me Quranic recitation when I was 6 years old, and who had apparently reviewed this document and found it in accordance with his interpretation of Islamic law. The document stated, in the formal architectural language of Arabic legal writing, that I had committed ridda, apostasy, the abandonment of Islam, and that in accordance with the family's duty to uphold religious law and protect the family's honor, I was to be transferred to the Sheikh's household immediately, within 72 hours, where I would be placed under his complete authority and custody. It further stated that should I resist transfer, or should evidence emerge that I had communicated my deviant beliefs to anyone outside the family, further measures would be authorized. Further measures. I stared at those two words for a long time. What does further measures mean? I asked. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Sheikh Mansour picked up the document, refolded it, returned it to his pocket. Then he looked at me with an expression that I have spent years trying to categorize and have finally settled on as not cruelty exactly, but the complete absence of the instinct that prevents cruelty, a blankness where compassion should have been. It means, he said, that your father loves you enough to give you a path that preserves your life. The Sheikh is willing still to take you, to correct you, to give you children and a household and the structure you clearly need. He paused. There are men in this family who have argued for a different resolution. Your father has protected you from those arguments. For now, he stood. He adjusted his bisht at the shoulder, that same habitual gesture of composure that I recognized from my father, the family tic of powerful men reclaiming their surface after an unpleasant task. 72 hours, he said. The car will come Thursday morning. He walked out. The door closed. The lock did not turn this time. He had not bothered to lock it, because we both understood that the lock was beside the point. I sat in that sitting room for a long time after he left. The document was gone, in his pocket, but its language remained in the room like a physical substance, those formal Arabic phrases pressing against the walls, against the ceiling, against the part of my chest that had been hollow since my birthday morning and was now not hollow anymore, but filled with something cold and specific and final. 72 hours. I tried to think clearly. I tried to construct a plan the way my father would construct one, strategically, patiently, without panic. I had no phone. I had no access to the household staff without supervision. I had not seen Miriam in 2 weeks and had no way of knowing whether she had been dismissed, whether she had been questioned, whether she was safe. I had no allies that I could identify. I had no way out of the east wing, which was monitored, and no way past the compound gates, which were guarded 24 hours a day by security personnel who reported to my father. I went to my bedroom. I sat on the floor, not on the expensive bed with its silk coverlet, not at the desk, but on the floor, against the wall, knees to my chest, the way I had sat in the closet, reading by flashlight, what felt like a lifetime ago. The marble was cold through my dress. The chandelier above me scattered its diamond light across the walls with complete indifference. Outside, the pomegranate tree stood in the dark courtyard, and the fountain, shaped like an eight-pointed star, murmured its soft, endless sound. I had no Bible. I had no Miriam. I had no plan. I had nothing except 3 sentences from a book that had been taken from me, running on a loop through the wreckage of my mind. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And one question pressed upward into that indifferent, chandelier scattered ceiling with everything I had left. If you are real, if you are actually genuinely real, then I need you right now. Not tomorrow, not in some future life, right now. Because I have 72 hours, and no one on earth can save me. The fountain murmured, the tree stood still, the light scattered, and the room for the moment stayed silent. But something in that silence was different now. Something in it felt, and I know how this sounds, I know how insufficient the word is, like listening. The second night after Sheikh Mansour's visit, I stopped sleeping. Not because I was planning, not because I was crying, though I had done plenty of that, pressed into the corner of my bathroom with the tap running so the new servant outside my door would not hear. But because somewhere around 2 in the morning, on the second night, the quality of the darkness in my room changed. I need to try to describe this carefully, because I am aware of how it sounds to a rational Western educated mind. And I want to honor your skepticism even as I tell you what happened. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to stay with me while I tell you the truth. I was lying on my bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. The chandelier was off. The only light came from the thin line of yellow beneath my bedroom door. The corridor light that burned all night now, another feature of my monitored new life. The room was dark in the way that expensive curtained rooms are dark, completely, heavily, with a thickness to it. And then, at the far corner of my room, near the window, the darkness changed. It didn't become bright, not immediately. It became warm. There is no more precise word than that. The darkness in that corner became warm, the way air becomes warm when you move from a shaded room into a patch of sunlight. Except there was no sunlight, there was no source, there was nothing physically present that could account for it. It was warmth without origin, warmth as a property of the air itself. I sat up. The light came gradually, and I want to be specific about this because the gradual quality of it mattered. Because it did not feel like a shock or an assault, but like a mercy, like something that understood I was fragile and was careful with me. It began as a soft luminescence, the color of early morning light just before the sun fully clears the horizon, that pale, clean gold that belongs to no lamp and no screen. It gathered in that corner of the room without casting shadows, which is a strange thing to notice, but I noticed it immediately. There were no shadows. Normal light creates shadows. This light simply was. It occupied the room without displacing anything. And in that light, there was a figure. I could not tell you, even now, exactly what he looked like. Not in the way I could describe my father, or Sheikh Mansour, or any other human being I have seen with my ordinary eyes. It was as though the part of my vision that processes physical detail was simply insufficient for what was in front of me. What I can tell you is presence. I can tell you that whatever, whoever, was standing in that corner of my room had a presence so complete, so total, so entirely without threat or agenda, that my body did something it had not done since early childhood. It relaxed. Not gradually, all at once. Every muscle in my back and shoulders and jaw that had been locked for weeks, for months, truthfully, perhaps for years, released simultaneously, like a fist opening. I did not decide to relax. My body simply recognized something and responded to it the way lungs respond to oxygen, automatically, without consultation. And I began to weep. Not the desperate, pressurized weeping I had done in the bathroom with the tap running. Something else entirely. Weeping that felt like release rather than collapse. Like a dam not breaking but being removed, deliberately, gently, by someone who understood exactly what had been held behind it and was not afraid of the flood. I pressed my hands over my mouth. I could not have said why. There was no one to hide from in this moment. Whatever was in my room with me already knew everything there was to know about me. I felt that with a certainty I cannot rationally justify, but cannot deny. I pressed my hands over my mouth and I wept, and the light stayed warm, and the presence stayed still, and it waited for me with a patience that felt infinite. Not the patience of someone enduring a delay, the patience of someone who exists outside of time and therefore cannot be made to wait because waiting requires time and they are not bound by it. Then he spoke. The voice was not audible in the way that my father's voice was audible, or Sheikh Mansoor's, or the muezzin's call to prayer. It was not precisely inside my head either, not the way your own thoughts are inside your head, self-generated and recognizably your own. It was something in between, or something that made the distinction between inside and outside irrelevant. It arrived the way truth arrives, not through the ears, but through the entire body, recognized rather than heard. He said my name, my real name, the name that I cannot share with you for my safety. He said it the way no one had ever said it, not as a designation, not as a category, not as the name of someone's daughter, or someone's wife, or someone's property. He said it as though it were the most precise and considered word in existence, as though he had chosen it specifically, as though it meant me, just me, the particular, irreplaceable, specific me that had been buried under bloodline and expectation and marriage contracts and locked doors. And then he said, I have been with you since before you were born. I cannot explain to you what those words did to me. In English, they might sound like a verse from a book, and they are. They echo things written in the Psalms and the book of Jeremiah in the Christian Bible. But when they arrived in that room, they did not feel like a quotation. They felt like testimony, like someone who was present for something telling you what they saw. I have been with you since before you were born. Not, I have been watching you. Not, I know about you. But, I have been with you. The preposition mattered enormously. With present tense extended backward into before time. Not observing from a distance, but accompanying. With me in the womb. With me in the marble corridors. With me on the prayer rug when the words dissolved 3 feet above my head. With me in the closet with the flashlight and the worn New Testament. With me in the sitting room when the document was placed on the table. With me right now, in this locked room, in these last hours. With me. I slid off the bed onto my knees. I did not decide to do this. My body decided. The same instinct that sends you to your knees before something genuinely vast. Not out of submission to power, the way I had been taught to kneel, but out of recognition, the recognition of something so real, so present, so entirely outside the register of everything I had been told the world contained, that standing seemed not just impossible, but absurd. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into my hands. "I didn't know. I didn't know it was you. I didn't know you were real. I'm so sorry." And he said, and this is the sentence I will carry for the rest of my life, the sentence I have repeated in the dark on every difficult night since, the sentence that has never once lost its weight or its warmth. "You were always mine, and I never let you go." I want to pause here and speak directly to you, whoever you are watching this. If you are a Muslim, I want you to hear this. I am not telling you that everything you were raised to believe was worthless. I am not telling you that your prayers meant nothing, that your fasting meant nothing, that the beauty of what you inherited was a lie. I am telling you that I searched inside a system I had been given, searched honestly, desperately, on my knees, and I found an emptiness. And then something found me. You are allowed to search. You are allowed to ask the question I asked on my birthday morning. Is anyone actually there? I promise you, he answers. If you are a Christian who has grown up with Jesus as a familiar name, a comfortable name, a name on a church sign you drive past without thinking, I want you to hear this too. He is not familiar. He is not comfortable in the way that comfortable things are forgettable. What stood in the corner of my room that night was not the pale, distant figure of religious habit. He is, the most real thing I have ever encountered. Do not take him for granted, please. There are people in locked rooms on the other side of the world tonight who would give everything they own to know his name. Do not sleepwalk through your access to him. The presence stayed with me until just before the Fajr call began to sound across the city. The light faded the way it had come, gradually, mercifully, like a hand slowly releasing rather than dropping. And when it was gone, the room was dark again. The thin line of yellow still burned under the door. The chandelier still hung in its indifferent splendor above me. I was still on my knees. My legs had gone numb from the marble floor. My face was wet. My hands, when I looked at them, were trembling, not from fear, for the first time in weeks, but from something I had no prior experience of, and therefore no existing word for. The closest I can come is this: the trembling of something that has been wound very tight for a very long time, finally being allowed to unwind. I stayed on the floor until feeling came back into my legs, and then I stood up, and for the first time since the lock had turned on my bedroom door, I was not afraid. Not because the situation had changed. The document still existed. The car was still coming on Thursday morning. Sheikh Mansour's signature was still on the decree. My father's seal was still pressed into the wax. None of the physical facts of my life had moved by a single millimeter. But I had been seen, completely, specifically, without condition or transaction, or the requirement that I be anything other than exactly what I was. I had been called by name. I had been told I was not alone, and had not been alone, not ever, not once, not for a single moment of my entire life. For the first time in my life, I knew I was loved. Not for my bloodline, not for my beauty, not for my compliance or my silence or my willingness to be transferred like an asset in a ledger. Just me. And that changed everything, because a person who knows they are loved is a different kind of person than one who doesn't. and a different kind of person makes different kinds of decisions. I looked at the thin line of yellow light under my door. I looked at the window. I looked at the pomegranate tree in the courtyard, just barely visible in the pre-dawn dark. I had less than 48 hours, and I had just been given a reason to use every single one of them. I had 47 hours. I knew the compound's rhythm the way I knew my own breathing. I had lived inside it for 15 years, and a palace, like any living system, has a pulse. I began to map it in my mind the way I had never needed to before, because before, the rhythm had been comfort. Now it was a code I needed to break. The new servant, I had learned her name was Fatima, though she had never offered it, and I had heard another staff member use it in the corridor, came with my breakfast tray at 7. She came with lunch at 1, dinner at 7 in the evening. Between those times, she sat in the small chair outside my door, and I could hear the faint sound of her moving occasionally, shifting in the chair, the soft tap of her phone screen. The overnight guard, a security man named by the sound of his heavy, deliberate footsteps, made his round of the East Wing corridor every 40 minutes. I had timed it, 40 minutes exactly. He was a man of habit, which meant he was, without knowing it, a man of predictable vulnerability. The window in my sitting room overlooked the inner courtyard with the pomegranate tree and the 8-pointed fountain. Beyond the courtyard was the east garden wall, 3 meters of pale stone topped with decorative iron scrollwork that was ornamental in intention and therefore not designed with serious containment in mind. Beyond that wall was the service road that ran along the back of the compound, used by delivery vehicles, maintenance crews, and the rotating staff who came and went through the service entrance rather than the main gate. I sat with all of this arranged in my mind like pieces on a board, and I understood, with complete clarity, that I could not do this alone. The wall I could manage. I had climbed the pomegranate tree since I was 6 years old, and the branches that stretched toward the garden wall had not moved in 15 years. The service road I could reach, but the service road led to the service entrance, which was also guarded, and beyond that to streets I had never navigated alone, in a city where a young woman without a male guardian, without a phone, without identification, would be noticed, stopped, and returned within the hour. I needed help from outside, and the only person I could think of who might be able to reach outside was the one person I had been specifically forbidden to speak to without supervision. I needed Miriam. The question was how. Fatima brought my lunch tray at 1 o'clock precisely, set it on the low table in my sitting room, and withdrew to her chair in the corridor. I ate slowly, thinking. The tray was returned, I had learned, by knocking twice on the door, after which Fatima would retrieve it. This was the only sanctioned interaction I had with the outside of my door. Unless I looked at the lunch tray. Lamb in a sauce of turmeric and black pepper, rice, a small dish of pickled vegetables, a glass of water, and the customary dates arranged in the small ceramic dish. The ceramic dish had a lid, small, unassuming, big enough for a piece of paper folded into a square the size of my thumbnail. I had no pen, I had no pencil. I had been stripped of every writing implement along with my phone. I looked around the room. I opened the drawer of my bedside table, empty, cleared out. I checked the decorative desk, also cleared. I went to the bathroom and looked at every surface. Nothing. And then I looked at the small pot of kohl, the dark eye powder that women in the Gulf have used for centuries, both for beauty and traditionally for its protective properties. It sat on the edge of the bathroom shelf, small and black and overlooked, because whoever had cleared my room of useful objects had not thought of cosmetics as a communication tool. I used a bobby pin from my hair. I dipped the tip in the coal pot. I tore the thinnest possible strip from the inside hem of my dress, fabric thin enough to fold 4 times and still fit beneath a ceramic lid, and I wrote, in letters so small I had to press my nose almost to the fabric to see them. Miriam, East Kitchen, tonight, after Isha, the tree. Please, Isha, the fifth and final Islamic prayer of the day, performed after dark, was at approximately 9 in the evening. After Isha, the kitchen staff completed their final duties and were released to their quarters in the staff wing, which meant Miriam would have a window of perhaps 20 minutes in which her location was unmonitored before she was required to be in her room. If she still worked here, if she hadn't been dismissed, if she was willing. I folded the strip of fabric into a square the size of my thumbnail. I placed it beneath the lid of the date dish. I knocked twice on the door. Fatima entered. She collected the tray without looking at me, as was her practice. The careful non-engagement of someone performing a task that required no connection. She left, the door locked. I sat down in the courtyard beside the pomegranate tree, and I prayed, in my new way, in plain English, into the open sky above the compound, that the right hands would find what I had left, that the date dish would go back to the kitchen, that Miriam would be the one to clear it, that she would feel, somehow, the difference in its weight. I prayed for 6 hours. At 9:47 that evening, I heard a sound from the courtyard, not a voice, not a footstep, a sound I recognized from childhood, the specific, soft scrape of the pomegranate tree's lowest branch against the garden wall when weight was applied to it from the courtyard side. Someone was at the tree. I moved to my sitting room window and looked out. The courtyard was dark except for the ambient light of the palace's exterior lamps that threw a pale wash over the garden. And there, at the base of the pomegranate tree, was a figure I recognized by posture alone. The particular stillness of someone who has learned to take up as little space as possible, to be present without presence. Miriam. I pressed my hand flat against the window glass. She looked up and saw me, and then she did something that broke my composure completely. She pressed her hand flat against her own chest, over her heart, and held it there, a gesture that needed no language. I see you. I'm here. You are not alone. I held up 3 fingers. 3 minutes. She nodded once and moved to the shadow of the wall. The overnight guard had made his round 8 minutes ago. I had 32 minutes before the next one. I pulled my abaya, the long black outer cloak, over my clothes. I checked the sitting room door, locked as always, but the window latch, a simple lever mechanism, internal, designed for ventilation rather than security, because no one had imagined that security was needed here, turned in my hand. The window opened outward. The night air came in, cool, carrying desert sand and the distant trace of exhaust from the service road. And beneath all of it, beneath everything, the faint warm sweetness of oud from the palace's exterior vents. The smell of my entire life. I breathed it in once, deliberately, because I knew in the way that you know certain things with your whole body, that I would not smell it from this side of these walls again. I climbed out of the window. Miriam took my hands in the shadow of the pomegranate tree, and she held them for exactly as long as we could afford, which was not long. They questioned me, she whispered, 3 days after they found the book. I said I didn't know you. I said I had never spoken to you directly. They believed me, or they chose to. I don't know which. Are you safe? I whispered back. She made a small, pragmatic gesture that was not quite a shrug. For now, that's all any of us get. She pressed something into my hands, a small cloth bag. There is money in there, not much, enough for a taxi and a phone call. There is a number written on the paper inside. It is a woman named Sister Agnes. She works with an organization that helps people in your situation. She knows this city. She knows which roads to take and which not to take. You call her the moment you are outside the service gate. How do I get past the service gate? Miriam was quiet for a moment, then she said, there is a guard on the service gate tonight, named Dawood. He has worked here for 9 years. He has a daughter who was married at 13. She paused. He has never said a word to me about anything that mattered. But last week, when I was carrying linen past the gate, he looked at me and he said, without context, without explanation, the back lock sticks. You have to lift the handle before you turn it. And then he looked away and said nothing else. I stared at her. I think, she said carefully, that Dawood has been waiting for a long time to do one thing that he could not undo. And I think tonight might be his night. She squeezed my hands once. Then she moved back toward the kitchen entrance, silent as water, as she always had been. I watched her go, this woman whose name I had barely known 6 weeks ago, who had carried a gospel in a tin of cardamom, who had pressed a worn New Testament into my hands with instructions on how to deny her, who had just handed me everything she had to give. I watched her go and I understood something I had not had the framework to understand before, that the kingdom of God, whatever and wherever it is full of people the world looked straight through. I turned toward the garden wall. The pomegranate tree held my weight, the way it had always held my weight. The branches were familiar under my hands. The same rough, slightly papery bark, the same diagonal reach toward the wall that I had used as a child to vault to the top and sit surveying the compound like a small, unsuspecting queen. I climbed in the dark without a flashlight, by memory and by feel, and when I reached the top of the wall, the iron scrollwork pressed into my palms, and I looked out over the service road. It was empty. One amber streetlight, the cracked asphalt of the service road, the smell of warm dust and diesel, the indifferent, gorgeous dark of the desert sky above it, more stars than Americans typically see, unpolluted by city light, an entire universe overhead going about its business. I dropped down on the other side. The fall was harder than I anticipated. My feet hit the road and the impact traveled up through my ankles and my knees, and I staggered, caught myself, stayed upright. My abaya had snagged on the scrollwork, and I left a strip of it behind. I did not look back. The service gate was 40 meters to my left. I walked toward it, not running, because running is noticeable and walking with purpose is not. And the amber light swam in my vision, and my pulse was so loud in my ears that I could barely hear my own footsteps. The guard post was lit. I could see the shape of a man inside it, medium height, squared shoulders, 9 years of service. I stopped at the gate. The man inside, Dawood, looked at me through the post window. Our eyes met. His face was the face of someone who has already made a decision and is now living in the second between making it and doing it. That particular suspension of a person crossing a line they know they cannot uncross. He looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then he looked away, out through the front window of the post, as if there was something very interesting happening in the empty service road in the other direction. As if the gate behind him did not exist. As if I did not exist. I put my hand on the back gate lever. I lifted the handle, the way Miriam had said, lift first, then turn. The lock gave. The gate swung open on a hinge that had clearly been recently oiled because it made no sound. I walked through. I called Sister Agnes from a phone borrowed from a woman selling bread from a cart at the end of the service road. A woman who looked at my face and my torn abaya and the way I was breathing and handed me her phone without asking a single question. The way certain women recognize certain situations without needing them explained. Sister Agnes answered on the second ring. She said, "Where are you?" I told her. She said, "Don't move, 15 minutes." It was 12 minutes. A white car with no markings, driven by a man I never learned the name of, who drove without speaking for 40 minutes through streets I didn't recognize, to a small ground floor apartment where Sister Agnes, a small woman in her 50s, with grey streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the specific, unshowy competence of someone who has done this many times before, opened the door before I could knock. She looked at me. She took in the torn abaya, the bare feet. I had lost my shoes somewhere between the pomegranate tree and the service road. The coal-smudged face, the way I was holding the cloth bag Miriam had given me with both hands, as if it were the only solid object in the world. She said nothing. She simply opened the door wider, and I walked inside. Behind me, the door closed. Outside, the city continued. The call to prayer beginning somewhere across the rooftops, the sound of car engines, the desert wind carrying its ancient sand through streets that had existed for centuries and would exist for centuries more, indifferent to one small person who had just walked out of one life and into another. I walked out of that palace with nothing, and I had never been richer. That was 3 years ago. I want to take a moment before I tell you where I am now, to tell you what the weeks after the escape actually looked like, because testimony videos like this one have a tendency to cut from the miracle directly to the triumph, and I think that does a disservice to everyone who is currently living in the middle part. The part between the escape and the peace. The part that doesn't make it into the thumbnail. Sister Agnes kept me in that apartment for 11 days. 11 days of sleeping on a narrow cot in a room with a window that looked out onto a concrete wall. Eating simple food, bread, rice, canned beans, the occasional orange, after years of saffron rice and roasted lamb served on hand-painted ceramic. 11 days of debriefing with a quiet, precise man who worked for an international organization I will not name, who helped people in circumstances similar to mine navigate the legal architecture of asylum. 11 days of filling out forms, making recorded statements, waiting. The waiting was its own kind of discipline. I had escaped a palace, and I was now confined to a single room by necessity rather than punishment. And I had to learn the difference between those two things, that the same physical circumstance can mean entirely different things depending on who locked the door and why. I was granted emergency asylum status and transferred out of the country on the 12th day. I will not tell you which country I am in now. I will tell you that it is cold in a way that still surprises me every winter. Cold in a deep, structural way that the desert never prepared me for, and that I have learned to love it. I have learned to love the grey skies and the particular smell of rain on pavement, and the way the trees here lose their leaves every autumn and stand bare and skeletal against the sky, and then, without fail, without exception, every single spring they come back. I think about that a lot. I was baptized 8 months after my escape. I want to describe this carefully because I understand that for some of you watching, particularly those of you from Muslim backgrounds, baptism is a loaded and perhaps threatening word. In the Christian tradition, baptism is an outward declaration of an inward transformation, a public act of saying, with your whole body, I have died to one way of living and I am rising into another. It is performed with water, which in Christianity carries the symbolism of cleansing and new beginning. My baptism took place in a small church in the city where I was resettled. Not a grand cathedral, nothing like the mosques I had grown up near, with their towering minarets and their geometric perfection. A small building on an ordinary street, with a wooden floor and a simple wooden cross on the wall, and perhaps 60 people seated in mismatched chairs. The baptismal, the tank of water used for the immersion, was at the front of the room, simple and white. The pastor who baptized me was a tall man with kind eyes and a voice that reminded me, for reasons I cannot fully explain, of my mother's prayer beads clicking in the evening, something steady and ancient and unhurried. He asked me the questions that are asked at baptism in this tradition. Did I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? Did I believe He died and rose again? Did I accept Him as my Lord and Savior? I said yes to each question, and with each yes, I felt something that I can only describe as a door closing. Not a frightening door, not the kind that locks from the outside, but the kind that you close yourself, behind you, because you have left a room and you are not going back. Because what is ahead of you is better than what you are leaving behind. He lowered me into the water. In the half second beneath the surface, in the complete, silent, warm submersion of it, I was 15 years old on a cold marble floor with a flashlight and a worn paperback. I was lying on my bed, staring at a chandelier that scattered light without warmth. I was on my knees in the dark, with the most real thing I had ever encountered standing in the corner of my room, saying you were always mine and I never let you go. I came up out of the water, and 60 strangers in mismatched chairs stood up and applauded. And I want you to understand that I had been applauded before, at formal family gatherings, at events where my father's name opened rooms. But I had never been applauded like that. I had never been applauded by people who had nothing to gain from my approval, who were celebrating not what I represented, but simply that I was alive, that I was here, that I had made it. I wept through the entire thing. The pastor handed me a towel and said, with the specific, warm humor of a man who has done this many times, they always cry, every single one, you're right on schedule. I want to tell you what I lost. I think it is important to be honest about this because there is a version of testimony that presents faith as a transaction. Give up the world and receive peace, and the peace is so overwhelming that the loss barely registers. That has not been my experience, and I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. I lost my family, all of them, my father, my mother, my brother Tariq, my sister Hessa, who told them about the book and who I believe was trying, in the only way she knew, to save me. I have not spoken to any of them in 3 years. I do not know if I will ever speak to them again. I do not know if they believe I am alive. I carry this. I want to be truthful. I carry it every day as a specific physical weight in my chest that does not dissolve and does not fully go away. Missing your mother is missing your mother, regardless of the circumstances. Missing the smell of your childhood home is real grief, even when that home was a prison. These things are not contradictions. They are the actual texture of what it costs to choose truth when truth is expensive. I lost my name, my real name, which I cannot use in my new life for my own safety, which means that a part of me exists only in the memory of people who may wish me harm and in the private knowledge of the God who spoke it in a dark room 3 years ago and has not forgotten it since. I lost my language as my primary language. Arabic was the language of my dreams, my prayers, my earliest memories, and I now live in a country where it marks me as foreign, as other, as someone with a complicated history. I am learning. I am always learning. I lost a version of the future I had been prepared for since birth, the certainty of position, of provision, of knowing exactly which room in which palace you would grow old in. Whatever you think of that future, there was a version of security in it that is genuinely gone. But I need to tell you what I gained. I gained a community of people who know my story and love me anyway. Not despite it, not with the uneasy tolerance of people managing an obligation, but with the specific practical love of people who show up, who notice when I am quiet, who leave food outside my door when I am having a hard week, who pray for me by name, my new name, the name I chose at baptism, which is mine in a way that my birth name, assigned to me as a designation of family property, never fully was. I gained peace. I want to be precise about this word because it is overused and therefore understood. I do not mean the absence of difficulty. My life has more practical difficulty now than it did in the palace. More uncertainty, more financial constraint, more bureaucratic complexity, more loneliness on certain nights than I knew was possible. What I mean by peace is the specific structural calm of knowing that the universe is not indifferent to you, of knowing that the darkness has a warm corner in it, of knowing that the most real thing in existence knows your name and has not let you go. That kind of peace does not require good circumstances. It operates independently of circumstances. I have tested this more times than I can count, and it has held every single time I gained Jesus. And I know that sounds like the obvious thing to say in a video called a testimony, but I want to say it without the ease of familiarity, the way it deserves to be said, with the full weight of what it means when someone who was not raised with this name, who was raised to consider this name a corruption and a deviation and a threat, encounters the person behind the name. He is not a concept. He is not a theological position. He is not a cultural identity or a family inheritance or a Sunday morning habit. He is, I reach for the most honest word I have, the most alive thing I have ever come near. And every morning when I wake up in my cold, ordinary apartment in my cold adopted country. I wake up in the same room as that aliveness. And that changes everything about every day. Now I want to speak directly to three groups of people, because testimony is not just personal history. It is meant to land somewhere specific. If you are Muslim and you are watching this, perhaps with suspicion, perhaps with curiosity, perhaps in secret, the way I read that New Testament on a cold floor with a flashlight, I want to speak to you with nothing but love. Not condemnation, not superiority, not the triumphalism of someone who believes they have won an argument. I grew up inside Islam. I know its beauty. I know the genuine devotion of people who pray 5 times a day, not out of fear, but out of real love for God. I am not here to tell you that everything you were raised to believe is worthless. I am here to tell you what I asked on a cold marble floor when I was 15 years old. Is anyone actually there? I asked it honestly, with everything I had, and something answered. I am asking you to ask it. That's all. Just ask it honestly. He is not afraid of your question. He has been waiting for it. If you are a Christian watching this, perhaps someone who has known the name of Jesus since before you could read, who has heard these stories so many times they have become familiar, comfortable, easy. I want to say this with love and with urgency. Do not sleepwalk. There are people in locked rooms right now, on the other side of walls you will never see, who are reading Gospels by flashlight and hiding thin paperbacks behind winter coats and asking into dark ceilings whether anyone is real. The faith you move through casually, the name you say by reflex, the church you attend by habit, these are not small things, they are everything. Treat them like everything. And if you are simply someone who is suffering, who came to this video not because you care about royal families or Middle Eastern politics, but because something in the title suggested that someone, somewhere, had been in an impossible situation and had found a way through, then this is what I want you to hear. He sees you. Not the version of you that has it together, not the version of you that you present to the world, the version of you that sits on the floor at 2 in the morning, pressing your fist against your sternum, trying to feel something solid. He is in that room. He is in that darkness. He has been there since before you were born. And whatever locked door is in front of you right now, I have watched a gun fail to fire 6 times. I have watched a gate open on a freshly oiled hinge. I have watched a woman press a gospel into my hands behind a shelf of cardamom. He is not out of options. He is never out of options. If you have never prayed a prayer like this before, and something in you is responding to this story, not just emotionally, but in that deeper place, that place below thought, where truth lands differently than information, then I want to give you the words. You don't need a palace floor. You don't need a flashlight or a worn paperback or a crisis. You just need honesty. Repeat after me in whatever language your heart speaks most naturally. Jesus, I don't fully understand who you are yet, but I am asking honestly. If you are real, show me. I acknowledge that I have lived without you, and I want that to change. I accept that you died and rose again. I accept that you love me, not the version of me I perform for other people, but the actual me. Come into my life. I am yours. If you prayed that, if you meant it, your life just changed. You may not feel it yet. I didn't feel mine for 11 days of eating canned beans in a concrete room, but it happened, and it will unfold. And you will look back one day from a distance, and you will be able to trace the exact shape of the moment everything turned. I want to close with one final thing. Somewhere in the country I came from, in a palace registry maintained by my family, my name has been removed. Formally, officially, permanently. I am no longer listed as a member of that lineage. The bloodline that opened palace doors across 3 countries has closed its door to me. My name has been erased from the record. I want you to know that I am at peace with this, not because it doesn't hurt. I told you already, honestly, that it does. But because I have read enough of that worn New Testament to know that there is another registry, one that does not revoke membership for asking honest questions in the dark, one that does not require a bloodline, a bride price, a compliance record, or a family seal, one that was updated, according to that book, the moment I said yes on a cold marble floor to something warm that had been waiting in the corner of my room. My name was erased from the royal records, but it is written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and that is the only registry that matters. If this story moved you, if it reached something real, please subscribe to this channel. Share this video with one person who needs to hear it. Leave your prayer request in the comments below. We read them, we pray over them. You are not anonymous to us, and you are certainly not anonymous to Him. You are seen, you are known, you are loved, and He has never, not for a single moment, let you go.